Good morning, everybody, and welcome today to Let's Talk Real Estate with my good friend, Arie, the lion of real estate. But we've got some little more tidbits I want to share with you before we begin. So I just did a live before, and what I want you to do is today, as you're listening to some of the information, and if you're a realtor, I don't want you to hang up. I want you to still continue on because here's the idea of everything. We tend to think really small in our lives. We think black and white. I want to start teaching people to think color. There's more than what we're talking about here. Let's take what we have. We have so many things around us, our specialties. Let's become to think in a bigger way. Just like we're saying, Arie is a realtor, he's a broker, now he's a coach. And on top of this, we're going to be even going bigger than that. So I want you to start looking at life in a very different way. I want you to start looking and learning. The whole idea of us doing these live shows is to start teaching you to think in very different ways. So today we're going to be starting through the beginning part of real estate, but I want you to think differently. And we'll go through this as we go through. So good morning, Arie. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm great. Thank you for asking. How are you?
I'm doing phenomenal. So I'm excited, and I'm hoping that my excitement is a little bit contagious because I always think, throughout my life, it's always thinking outside the box. I don't know why, but my head always goes into things that are bigger and more. And I want to encourage people to do exactly that. I want you to start thinking totally outside the box. I want you to all think there's so many different ways that we can become more than what we are right at the present time. So today we're going to start going through, and if people are looking at, now never mind of just buying that first house. There's so many different ways, but if you start learning the core, we can build into more of the core. So it's the core now is starting to look at the things of, is your first house, is this okay for you? How do you set up ownership, home ownership that's right for you? So Arie, let's begin by talking about, is home ownership right for you? I know people start to shine away, and the cost of things has gone so big these days that people start thinking that maybe real estate isn't good for me. What do you think about
Right.
that?
And perfect. Yeah. And I want to just, before I get on that topic, I want to just jump back to what you were mentioning about thinking outside of the box. So I've worked with a lot of different people that they see opportunities when other people's don't. I remember, through COVID, just as an example, a lot of people were complaining that, being in a bidding war doesn't allow them to do a home inspection, and that they don't know what they should pay, and they can't really look at comparables because really they don't matter. What matters is, what everyone is going to be paying and how many offers are on the table and who's basically crazy enough to pay the most amount of money. And of course, then, there's also the issue with, will it be appraised for that price? So there's always going to be skeptical people, and then there's always going to be people that look at everything as an advantage. And so just to give you an example of what I think what you're saying, Glenda, is thinking outside of the box in a market where interest rates are extremely high. There's definitely opportunities there because people are not buying. So on the buying side, it's actually great. You can look for that house that you really wanted to live in, or to that you couldn't get when there was crazy bidding wars. Somebody who has a completely renovated home might be selling their home today, and there won't be lots of offers on it, and you can get an inspection done, and you can get your financing condition in. So there's a lot of advantages to every situation and every market. So you definitely hit the nail on the head when you said think outside of the box. There's tons of opportunities, and really that's kind of how working with clients right now. The clients that are buying right now and selling are the ones that are, like, for example, trading, right? They would do something like, they want to upgrade. This is a perfect time to upgrade your house, and you can port your mortgage, so it doesn't really affect you with interest rate, right? But yeah, if there's any other questions about that kind of stuff, then feel free to contact me. And let's get into if home ownership is right for you. Well, I mean, my opinion is going to be biased. I think, there's really two options here. There's renting and there's owning. And I think on the last call or Zoom meeting, we discussed the advantages and disadvantages. Ultimately, home ownership is basically, or even renting, it's a basic necessity. Everybody needs a place to live. So it's definitely something that needs to happen, whether you own or not. That is really, I guess, up to the person. But I haven't come across too many people that wouldn't want to own as opposed to rent, right? And as discussed in our last meeting, I would say that if there's a few or a handful of situations where home ownership is not right, and I guess it depends if you're traveling a lot, if you're moving for work, or if you're only temporarily staying in a country or in a city, for example. Then you kind of get placements, right? But I haven't really come across
around that too. Sorry for interrupting, but let's talk looking realistically. It's all about making your money work for you. So if you find that you want to have a thing, you want to have a home, you want to have your money work for you. In other words, you're going to make more money in real estate than you are per se in the bank.
Yeah, sorry, I came across something. You just reminded me. I came across something. I don't remember where I found it recently, but I think maybe it was a comment that somebody made. But when somebody complains about the 6 or 7% interest that they would have to pay on the mortgage, and they're renting, remind them that it's 100% interest rate when they're paying rent, right? So it kind of like a lot of people actually come across that are renting that. It depends if you can buy, right? But if they can buy, they just almost like they use it as an excuse to say that, hey, you know what, the interest rate is too high. But really, you're paying rent, which is 100% interest rate, because you're not getting that back at all. And to be fair, too, the rent today is almost the same amount as a mortgage, right?
And that's what you got to look at. So when I said it's time to think outside of the box, it's time to think better. And I understand that people are really scared to get into owning. I get it. You know what? I remember the first time I bought a house. But here's the thing. When you start going into the real estate market and you start to prepare, and that's what this thing is today, is we're going to help you start to learn how to prepare. Now, let's talk about this. This is the first time we're talking about first-time ownerships or making that time. But also, like I said, the idea is to get into the market. Even if you can only get into the market for a short time, let's say you're in that country for a short time, you can still buy. If you've got to move, you can still turn around and rent that property. You can get people to actually be the overseers of your property if you're not going to be around, and there's still money that can come in. You can do things in a way that you can make your money work. You can take a house, you can make it into two houses, like a duplex, and then you're creating cash flows, which means you have one person that's paying for your mortgage and maybe the extra person that's bringing in. There's all different ways. It's time to think outside the box.
That's right.
So let's talk about, okay, so we now know that we got to look at life as whether it's worth having a home to buy or rent. Well, if you are a mover and a shaker and you want to start having more to life than what it just gives you, and you know what, here's the thing: if you're just working and you're paying for you're just an employee and you're working for your money, isn't it great to have, if you could take that money, even if it makes you a little bit uncomfortable, to put that money into a property that you can, even as it grows, and real estate is still going to grow. It might drop, but it's still going to grow. What do you say about that, Arie?
Yeah, so over time, it definitely will grow. I mean, the past doesn't lie, and at the end of the day, as I said before, it's a basic necessity. It's like food. People need to live somewhere. Also, in Canada, we have lots of new immigrants that are coming in every year. So there's a huge demand. The one thing too that I want to mention is that I look at Canada versus the States very different, right? We have really two major cities where a lot of people reside, right? Like very, very expensive cities. And that's really Vancouver and Toronto, right? Where the States, there's a lot of states. So it's kind of more spread out. And this is why I think we have such a major demand when it comes to Toronto. And this is why I think that it won't really stop or slow down in terms of growth. In regards to putting in money into real estate, like I want to just use an example from my past. So in 2014, I bought an investment property, and it was at the time, I believe it was I paid $335,000. It was on 20 John Street. It was a 600 square foot condo, just under, like 590 square feet. I remember at the time the rent was about $1,700 a month. Today, you'd be paying, I'd say, about $2,200-$2,300. So that's quite a bit of a jump. But the cool thing was that condo was sold in 2000, I believe, 19 for about 500 and change. So that's kind of where it stands today. It's about like Toronto is about $1,000 per square foot, if not more, right? So close to 600,000 if you think about it. And the other cool thing is that, say for example, if you have a tenant in there, that mortgage gets paid down as well. So there's a big gap that grows, right? There's that appreciation, and then there is that pay down of the mortgage. And meanwhile, like you said, right? Like you can still work your job, you can still do other things, but that condo is basically growing. That equity is there for you, and then what you do is you don't have to sell it. You can pull out the equity and you can buy another investment property.
Okay,
And
stop. I want you to explain to someone, when you're like, we got to realize that there's a lot of people that are watching and don't know our lingo. So when you say pull out the equity, let's explain what equity is.
Okay. So I'll explain it in a different way. So when you go to buy your property right now, you know how everybody says, well, your down payment usually is 20%, right? That's your loan to value. Okay. So let's just, to round it off, let's just say your property is worth, or let's say it costs $100,000. You bring in $20,000, and the bank basically fronts you the $80,000. Now, typically, loan to value is 80%. Okay, that's technically what the banks are willing to go to. Anything more than 80%, say you want to buy with only 10% down, which means the bank has to finance 90%. Now it's called almost like a high risk mortgage. That's when CMHC kicks in. CMHC is basically a government body that it's insurance, right? So they insure the loan. So if, for example, something goes wrong, then that insurance kicks in. If you don't pay, that insurance kicks in, and the banks are covered, right? So the banks up to 80% will lend you the money without CMHC. A lot of people understand that because they know that anything under 20%, actually there's a fee that they have to pay for that insurance. And by the way, on my website, there's mortgage calculators and CMHC calculator as well. So if you punch in the number of your property that you want to purchase, it'll tell you if you pay under 20%, it'll tell you how much you pay, and it's a scale, right, in terms of insurance. So back to the example. So say, for example, you buy the property, and now 5 years later, it's not 100,000 anymore. It's worth $150,000. Okay, but your mortgage is now slowly being paid down as well. So you started with 80,000, and you might have paid, say, 20,000. Okay, and again, these are just rough numbers. Like, obviously I'm not calculating it. I'm just kind of giving you an example, and I'm showing you how the gap grows. So now your property is worth 150,000, and you paid it down to 70,000. So 80% would be 120,000, right? So 120,000 would be 80% of 150,000. And so if you went back to the bank and you wanted to borrow the difference would be between 70,000 and 120,000, if you follow me. So because your mortgage now is 70,000, but your property is now worth 150. 80% of 150 is 120. The difference between 120 and 70 is $50,000. Therefore,
great down payment maybe on another property.
Right.
Or if you want to start putting improvements in, it's a great way to start taking that money and improve the property that you have. Either way, it's a win.
Correct. Right. And then the best part is that once you take that money out in terms of equity, you still have a tenant there. They're paying it off. There was a long time ago, I found this saying about how, the tenant basically, like when you look at an investment property, the tenant is kind of like almost like an employee of the investment property. They wake up in the morning, they maintain your property, they pay all the bills. And at the end of the day, when it's time to sell, they walk away and leave you with all the profits, right? And so when I read that, it was kind of powerful to me, because to be honest with you too, at that time I was renting, right? So when I say this, it's not to hurt anybody's feelings. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I got into real estate, is because I saw the power that it has behind it, and how not only does it change lives and help people in terms of, seeing families move into homes and be able to have that big backyard, or even, being in a prime location in Toronto in a condo. But the best part about it was you're always still building that equity. And if you really wanted to grow that more than just your primary residence, you can actually, start investing. And this is kind of how I got into investing with my clients, and why I bought my investment property, because it was too hard to say no. It didn't make sense to say no. If you can do it, then you should do it. It's all about whether or not you can get the approvals, but it's also a little bit of persistency, right? You have to be very persistent in what you want. If you see a goal, you can't just, nothing worth having comes easy, right?
But even so, when you see something that you really like, instead of saying, "Oh, I can't afford it," change your way of thinking about it. Start asking yourself, how can I afford it? Don't all of a sudden say, so the whole idea is finding yourself somebody who will actually sit down and start working with you, thinking, okay, let's find a way that you can afford this. Because, maybe that particular property that isn't good for you, or you can't afford it, but maybe if you sit down with an agent who really thinks outside the box and can help you decipher a way that you can afford it.
Right. Yeah. No, 100%. Experience is key. I mean, there's so many options. There's so many different ways. And you know what? I learned that because I work with good mortgage brokers. Some mortgage brokers, they know what questions to ask. They know which banks to approach and how to approach them and what programs they have. Right. So there's so many variables. I mean, I'm self-employed, and when I go to get a mortgage, it's not easy. Right. They being self-employed, they don't care about your gross income. They look at your net, right? So, when I go to a mortgage broker and he's able to find a program where, they might not look at my gross, but they give you a certain percentage that they call it an allowance, right? So that they can take a little bit of your gross, because they know that you're self-employed, and they know that you have more write-offs than the average, like, for example, person that isn't, right? Yeah. So I think it's definitely great. And one more thing that comes to mind is think about your future and your kids, right? Real estate, I mean, you automatically leave them something, even if you just have one property, even if you don't, invest in two or three properties. If you invest in two or three properties, I call it like the game of Monopoly, right? You're winning when you own what, three or four red houses or in one hotel, or greenhouses in one hotel. I don't remember. I haven't played it in a while, but that's kind of what it is.
Okay, let's start moving because we got to look at our
Yeah.
time restraints and we want to get some information out. Upfront costs. So let's start looking at initial amount of money that you need to buy a home. And what we're looking at is some of the things. So we're looking at what? First,
Okay.
a down payment. Go for it.
Yeah. So the down payment, well, there's the deposit, but that gets done as soon as you make an offer and it gets accepted. You need to put a deposit. So typically the deposit depends on how long the closing. If it's a 30-day closing, then you can do a $20,000 deposit because it's really 1 month. If it's a 3-month closing, typically the seller is going to want more money because they want to make sure that in 3 months, even if your situation changes, you're not going to walk away. I've seen somebody do that, not with me, but I've seen this happen to another seller, and I came along after, and she told me the story where somebody only put down $5,000 and they didn't close, and then you're now trying to sue somebody, and it's it's time consuming. She just didn't want to go through it. So then there's a deposit. Now, one quick thing: the deposit actually is a part of your down payment, so that the deposit is a part of your 20% that we were talking about. Okay. Then there's one of the biggest ones is land transfer tax. Okay, so I have a calculator on my website where you can punch in the amount of the purchase price, and it'll calculate the land transfer tax. One thing to mention is that it has there's two types of land transfer tax. If you're in Toronto, there's provincial and federal. Okay, so you're paying both. If you're not in Toronto, then you're not. So that's basically the biggest factor. So you have to really make sure that sorry, my phone this is a life of a real estate agent. It keeps ringing, so I have to turn it on silent. Yeah. So the land transfer tax basically is the biggest one. And then there is, if you're CMHC, for example, if your down payment is less than 20%, then there's that CMHC. Now, the CMHC gets worked into your mortgage. However, you have to pay the HST on a CMHC insurance. So, say the insurance could be hypothetically about $11,000. You don't have to pay the $11,000 that goes into your mortgage. That becomes a part of your mortgage, but you have to pay the HST the day you close. So the day that you go to see your lawyer to sign for your new property, they will ask you for your 20%. They'll ask you for your land transfer tax, and they'll ask you for the HST on the CMHC insurance. Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to remind people that might be watching us from outside of Ontario or Canada that, what were some of these terms of CHMC and all the rest of it. These are terms that are in Canada. But let me just tell you something. If you're watching this and you're outside of our country, you also have taxes that you're responsible for. You also have a down payment that you're responsible for. And it's very easy to just Google out and find out what type of closing costs or even upfront costs that are needed before you purchase a property or to put into consideration as you're closing your property. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. Yeah. And then there is obviously the lawyer fees, which is roughly between $900 to about $1,200, and that's just their fees. And then it trickles down to other little things like there's adjustments, for example, right? So if you move in, say in the middle of the year, you're paying for anything that let's say property taxes is an yearly thing. You're paying for the following 6 months after you move in. So the lawyers do the adjustments. And then there's the moving costs. There's also an inspection cost, and this is when you actually make an offer. And if you have an inspection condition, it's about $500 just for that alone, right? And then keep in mind, if you don't get the property, you're going to pay that again, because then you'll go and put another offer on another property. So there's small fees. What else? Let's see. There's an appraisal cost sometimes, depending if you're going with a B lender or an A lender. And then I always tell my clients, this is the last thing I always say, there's going to be some things that are under $1,000, right? Like, so you're going to move in. I know a lot of people like to just replace the toilets, right? Stuff like, little things like door handles or, small stuff. Home ownership always has some kind of a maintenance cost. But typically when you move in, you're going to notice little things that you're going to want to do, like even paint, right? That could be something that, you might not hire someone for if you have the time and you're able to do it, but you still have to pay for the paint. So there's still like, $1,000 or so that you should put aside for things that you can think of that you might want to do.
The other thing is I want you, it's all about your mindset. I want you to stop thinking. And I know because I had a client that bought a house and they were thinking, oh, it's costing me this, it's costing me that. No, it's not costing you. I want you to change the way you think. I want you to look at when I paint my house, when I make things prettier and make it look better, what you're doing is you're adding value to your property. It's not, instead of it's costing me, instead of that looking at it, start looking at the value that you're putting in your investment. Your investment is getting better because you are doing things to it. So, if you're even outside, first of all, it's really important to change the look of the outside, because, what's the very first thing that you look at when you see a property? You're going to drive by. It's the drive-by look. You got to make sure that the house looks good. So these are all things of actually increasing the value of your own property.
Right. And you know what, Glenda, you actually just made me remember something else. So, everybody knows that when you're buying a used car, it's usually, lots of wear and tear, right?
Right.
So not the first, but it could be the second question, but it's always a question: how many owners did this car have? And the more owners it has, usually, the more people look down upon that car, where a house is completely the opposite, right? The more owners it has, typically the more renovations have been done, because every time that somebody moves in, they usually renovate the property or do something or fix something. Not all the time, but typically that's kind of how it works.
So let's look at the first thing we got to look at if we're looking to buy a house. Are you financially ready to own a home? And I know this is a scary thing for most people, but we need to sit down to see where our money goes, because, oh my God, I know it's like the end of the month, you're running out of money. So let's start looking, put a list together. So we want to get you prepared. Preparing yourself means mentally and physically. So are you ready to own your first home? So look right now of how much you are spending right now. Where are your dollars going? Put a list together for yourself. So can we start putting a list of some of the monies, where our money is going? How about how much do you spend a month on groceries? Do you spend money on clothing? Some of this stuff is sometimes when we don't own a property, we can just throw our money away because we don't think about anything. But when you have to pay a mortgage, then you have to really be understanding of where your money is going. Correct, Arie?
Right. Yeah. And also, on the flip side, I just want to kind of make everyone aware, like whether you're renting or you own, you're still paying the same amount of utilities. Like typically, the renter pays the utility. So all that stuff gets paid. When you're owning, the only biggest difference is that you're paying for a mortgage and property tax. That's pretty much it. So if you want to own, the best advice I can give you is just be very responsible. And what you said, Glenda, is have the ability to track what you're spending your money on. And that's exactly even how I started, right? I had a spreadsheet, and I pulled my statements for the last 3 months of my bank account, and I organized it based on, food, entertainment, and so on. So different categories. And then you start looking at what you can, for example, cut out, right? You might not have to. You might be doing very well, right? But if regardless, there's almost always a possibility to make that switch from renting to owning something. You just have to sit down and basically map it out.
So, okay, so if you're looking at what your spending cost is, break it down into 3 parts: household expenses, loans and debts that you are responsible to, and entertainment expenses. Get an idea there. And never mind just pulling out your bank records, also pull out all your credit card records. Because one way or another, you can find records of what you've been doing in the last 3 to 6 months. And remember, as soon as we have an idea of that way, then that's the starting ground, right? Now,
Correct.
we talked about whether we can afford the house, and that's where we have to start looking at our spending money. And what do you think? You were talking about the affordability rule, looking at the general rule of monthly housing costs should be more than 32% of the average of our gross monthly income. So let's look at what we have. We have monthly mortgage rates that we have to do, property taxes, heating expenses. These are all types of things. If you're looking at a condo, remember there's maintenance fees with condos. So is it more expensive to live in a condo? Yes and no. It can be in some respects, but then there's the other thing is you don't have to worry about situations of looking after of a property outside, because condo expenses pays for all of this. And this could be also true with if you're looking to buying a house that's more of row housing or I'm blanking out of what we call houses, not row houses,
Townhouses.
Townhouses, right?
Yes.
Thank you. So all these things, there's all different ways of looking at it. So let's start looking at our ways of, what type of property works best for you.
Yep. I think that's very, very accurate. I mean, maintenance fee in a condo, it's almost like a peace of mind fee, right? You're basically just responsible for your 4 walls and what's between them. And everything around it is being maintained. And if anything goes wrong, then it's money that's pooled from all the owners. But there's obviously there's pros and cons, and really those pros and cons really they're very, very individualized. Like it depends on your preference. And that's something that if you're not sure about, we can sit down and we can always discuss and figure that out, and kind of throw ideas in the air. I do that with my clients all the time. And you'd be surprised. I had people that, first they started to look at properties that were detached homes, and they ended up in a condo because they just, at the end, they just thought it was way too easier, like way less work. Sorry.
Well, the other thing with condo living is you can travel very easily. You lock the door, you walk out, and you don't have to worry about anything. But there's still always the thing of we have to look at, and this is something that people need to do shopping of as well, is insurance purposes. So, remember that, when you're buying a property, you still have to have insurance. But hey, we buy a car and we need insurance.
Right. Yeah. And then on the flip side, for a home, there's some major, major things that you have to worry about if they break down, like major repairs, right? So you're looking at one of the biggest things, or a few of the biggest things, I should say, is a roof. That needs to be replaced every, say, 15 years or so, right? Could be more depending on what kind of roof, but typically when you get the house and it's just a builder's roof, it's usually about 10 to 15 years. Windows is a big one, especially if you're, if you're buying a new house, you're good for a while, but Usually the older homes, every 20 years or so, you'd have to replace some windows. It could, maybe not all at the same time, but they're not cheap. Then you have things like furnace, right? Again, that's, it all adds up. You got air conditioning. And then there's, there could be potential issues like, for example, the house shifts and all of a sudden you have a leak, right? And foundation issues, things like that, right? Mold is another big one, right? If you don't keep your humidity in your house at a certain temperature, you could run into mold problems. I've seen mold in attics so much lately. It's almost kind of getting used to it by now, and you can do mold remediation, but that might not always solve the problem. There could be venting issues. There's all kinds of issues. So it's not to scare anyone, but that's the reality, right? And you just have to maintain it well. And if you can maintain everything, then get ahead of it, plan properly, then you'll be okay.
But let's go back a second, because I remember one of the properties I bought, the one thing that I had to do, and I wanted people to let you know that it's really important when you're going into a property to look, that sometimes it's really great. I know we all look at the outside, how pretty it is, and you walk in and doesn't it look really nice? But it's really important if you can take somebody with you who really knows real estate. I'm saying go up into the attic and do a look. What is the house? How has the house been properly insulated? If your insulation isn't proper, or in years ago, they used to put in the wrong insulation, that alone can actually save you money, because let me tell you, it is then the seller's responsibility that you could actually have something that maybe, let's talk about the insulation that they used to put into the houses, which is actually very harmful to people, which actually has to be changed. And then before you take ownership, that is something that would actually become the seller's responsibility, or could change the purchase price because of that.
Yeah, and it's not just insulation. There's been also some issues with condos. So there's like a thing called high-tech plumbing. So it's a certain type of plumbing that they were using, and when I guess, like, I don't remember the year, but like they found out that it was faulty. So units would have issues with these plumbing, and they would cause water damage, and it could affect the next unit. So since then, a lot of the buildings made it almost mandatory to replace it, and it's the owner's responsibility. So say, for example, you bought a unit and you didn't put that clause or condition saying that the owner has already replaced it, or that your unit doesn't have high-tech plumbing. Say you don't put that in, you move in, you find out down the road that you have to pay about $10,000 to go and replace all the plumbing. Right. So little things like that can cost you a lot of money, but they can also save you a lot of money. Right.
So be very careful of, and this is why it's really important that when you have an agent, that, well, either your agent or your broker, and some agents are not brokers. Arie is a broker and an agent, but it's because they understand and know more. So, really looking at how you word your offer, that there are conditions. And I know that depending on the time of the market, because, not too long ago, we were in a crazy market where you couldn't have any conditions on property, right?
That's
because
right.
You had a condition, what happened?
Right. Yeah. There would basically be, I mean, I don't want to say minimum amount. There was never a minimum amount, but I've seen, the average place would have at least 5 offers, if not 30 offers, depending on the price range it was listed at. And at the end of the day, when you're competing with 5 to 10 to 30 buyers, it's almost, I don't want to say guaranteed, because that's a dangerous word, but almost always there was somebody that just didn't have any conditions. They said, here, if you accept this offer, if you sign your name on this line, your property is sold, right? So it came down to just basically how much are you willing to pay. Conditions were a thing of the past, right? And that all changed now, right? Now there is all kinds of conditions. Like you can buy a house right now and say like you own a house, you can put a condition. It's called an SPP, sell personal property, right? So you can buy somebody's house and say, this condition is not this purchase is not firm until I sell my house, and if I don't sell my house in the next 30 days, then the deal is off. So you basically, you're able to kind of put a hold on it, right? Now, mind you, the seller can continue marketing and selling their home. So if they get another offer, all they have to do is give you between 24 and 48 hours, depends how the condition is written, to have the first right of refusal, right? And then either you firm up or you get bumped. And if you're bumped, you're basically out, and then they can accept the other offer. So it kind of works for both sides. But yeah, there's a lot of different conditions, not only, as we said about, protecting yourself, but you're able to do more, right? Like think outside of the box, right? So if you're sitting there and let's say you do own a home, and you're thinking, well, how can I buy another home? What happens if I don't sell my home? Well, we have a solution for that, right? The question comes down to, do you know what to do? And some people do and some people don't, right? It's just like any business. Some people think outside of the box and some don't.
So learning what you're able to do is one of the things that is so important. That's why it's really important to have somebody who knows, who's very very active in the market as it's happening now. And remember, if you have an agent who's working with you and there's certain things that you're not getting out or you're thinking of it, there's nothing wrong with saying to your agent, I really would love to sit down also with your broker and let's, before I put my offer out, let's look at what can I put into that offer that A, most importantly, protects me, and B, gives me as much leverage as I can possibly do.
Right.
So remember who is in the driver's seat. Let's talk about that for a second, Arie.
Yeah.
As your purchaser or your seller comes to you, you're the person that's working for them, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So one of the things that look, a deal has to be fair to both parties, right? But ultimately, we represent our clients, whether it be the seller or the buyer. So it depends on the I guess which side of the fence I'm sitting on. That's who I represent. That's who my loyalty stands with. And when I work with them, I try to show them all the options and say, hey, what do you want to choose here? Now, mind you, I do want to mention one thing. So it's great to have conditions. It's great to have that power and to be in control. But sometimes if you overdo it, you might also lose. I don't want to say the sale, like or the purchase, right? You might, I guess, so it's a negotiation tool as well. So one of the things, I'm gonna throw this out there. So one of the things that we sometimes use, even in a market like this, is if you can go with an offer with the least amount of conditions, right? So say, for example, we found a house you like, and you're pretty confident about this house. Say instead of a 5-day financing condition and a 5-day inspection condition, we put just a 1-day inspection condition. So we tell the seller, look, we just want to do an inspection. We'll only take up one day. So we'll do it tomorrow if you accept this offer today. And we'll either firm up or we'll walk away, right? That can give you more of a negotiation power in terms of price. Another thing is, what if the seller already bought a property and they need to get out of their house in the next 30 days, right? Again, you can offer them, say if you're on the buying side, you can offer them a little bit less money, but you can give them what they want, which is the quicker closing. You see what I mean? And then I'll give you one last example. So from a seller's perspective, a lot of times they do what's called a pre-inspection. Okay, so the seller before they list their own property, they will do a pre-inspection so that when you as a buyer walk in, you can basically look at this inspection report and see that, you know, there is or there isn't anything wrong with the house. So it's almost like here's a full disclosure of, you know, my house. And sometimes from a buying perspective, that, you know, that might make you comfortable enough to just make an offer that's firm, because your financing might be there, right? You might already, maybe you sold your house, right? Maybe you just have a big down payment. Maybe you talk to the bank, your income is really, really good. I mean, your situation could be different. Everyone's situation is different. And the bank says, yeah, you know what? You're approved for $2 million, but the house you want to buy is only $800,000, right? So you have that big, you know, financial backing. The bank says, go for it. So you don't really need your finance condition. Okay. And now you don't need an inspection condition, because you looked at the inspection report and the house looks great, right? Everything's good to go. So you can give the seller a firm offer, but you can also go in at a much lower price than if somebody else went in against you and wanted to make an offer that has, you know, a 5-day finance condition. And so just all I'm saying is look at it from the seller's perspective, right? They're sitting there and let's say they're looking at two offers, right? They're looking at one offer that has, say it's $20,000 more, but there's a risk that in 5 days, this person might back out. There's a risk that the person, actually, I think that might have happened to you. I don't remember if that was the case, but this happens to my clients a lot, right? So like somebody might offer you more money, but there's escape clauses, right? And then you have an offer that's a little bit less, you know, 10, 20 grand. And in the bigger scheme of things, it is a little bit less, but it's firm. If you sign this offer today, you sold your house, right? If the other one falls apart, you now have to go back on the market. Now, if you don't sell in 15 or 20 days, you might want to drop the price. So technically speaking, that 20 grand, you know, if you're on the market in 30 days, you're going to drop that price by 20 grand anyways. So it's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of dynamics to it. But yeah, if you know what you're doing and you're able to navigate through this, then there's a good chance that you can be in the driver's seat, like you mentioned.
So it's really important that, you know, when you're going in, whether you're buying or selling, it's really important to have that time with your agent, broker, whatever, to sit down and have you figure out what type of way you're going to do it. You need to have that real conversation of how you're going to buy or how you're going to be selling. You have to have a strategy. And it's really important that you figure out the strategy before. Why? Why is it important, Arie?
Because if you don't plan and you kind of wing it, you're definitely not going to get the results that you want. You're gonna end up, you know, making a mistake, and it's a big mistake when it comes to real estate. You can't make mistakes. That's the way I see it. You have to be very, very diligent, and diligence takes a lot of planning.
And the other thing is just think of this. You're a football game and you're all together. You work as a team, and that's the big word, team. And if you don't all sit down or when you get into your huddle and you figure out, you know, what's our strategy? Which way are we going so that we can actually score a goal? We can have a touchdown. We have to come together as a team, figure out our strategy. Why? So we can work as a team. So that when we go down, when we're heading down to the goal to hit us, sorry, I'm not a big football player, but to head down to score that goal, to have that end result, you all have to work together. So if you don't connect up and inform each other of what type of analogy you're going to be pulling it out so that you're going to score at the end, you're going to sell that property, you're going to make it through, then you're on your own. And that's like real messy action.
Yeah. And you know what, I'll give you another point of view too, when it comes to real estate, right? So you don't build a house by just like, ordering a bunch of bricks and just starting to build it and see what happens, right? Typically, anything that's built in real estate is usually done backwards, meaning it's already completed before it actually gets started, right? So when I work with people, I like to know what the end result and end goal is, right? A
Love it.
lot of times people come to me and they say to me, like, I'm looking for a really good deal. But ultimately, my question to them is, are you looking for a deal or are you looking for a home? Right? Like, it's not very common to do both, right? So I have investors that when they buy properties, they don't buy properties for themselves. They look at the numbers, they look at the area, they look at the tenant quality. To them, it's not an emotional transaction. They don't care if they get the offer accepted, right? Because it has to make sense. The money has to make sense. The financial part has to make sense. The rental income has to make sense. But when you're looking at a house, for example, and you want to buy a property for yourself, you got to look at it from a different perspective, and so do I, right? It's somewhere where you're gonna live for the next 5, even 10 years, maybe longer, right? Is it somewhere that it has the needs for all your family? Like, how many kids do you have? Does it have good schools around it? So you're not just buying a property and saying, I want a good deal, right? Like, what if you got a good deal, but your kids go to a bad school, right? Or maybe they have to travel to school and it takes, it takes too long. Another fun fact is, when you're buying, for example, a rural property, a lot of people don't think about this, but how's your internet? Because I can tell you, like, that's a huge mistake that a lot of people make, right? They buy a property and all of a sudden they move in. They're like, oh, I don't have good internet. I work from home. So now I have to, like, how do I get internet? I have to drive out to do something or to send a big file, right? You can't do that, right? So little things are very important. Little things are very, very important. It's the details, right?
So you made a really great point. What I always say, and I've done this as, first of all, as an investor, and actually where I am now, even as this property that I own now, is I always make a wish list. What are all the things that I want? First of all, I just, you know what, this is some of the things that I say is, first of all, do a brain dump. Write down all the things that you want that perfect property to be, whether it's going to be your home or if it's going to be an investment property. Write down everything that you think. Then you go back and you put in what are the key components that you can't live without. These are the things that make the total difference, because you don't want to buy a property, just like Arie said, that maybe your kids are young and you know that it's going to be a long wave, that they're going to be going through school for a long time. So maybe one of the most important things is the school that they're going to attend. I remember years ago when I was buying another property, one of the major decisions that why I was moving, because I was not living in Toronto, I was living outside, and I was wanted to move back into Toronto. One of the major situations that I was looking at was the high school that was in the area, because that's where I needed to be in an area where I knew that the high school area was going to be important. I wanted my kids to go to a really great high school. And that was one of the causes of why I bought where I had bought. So what is your important factors in your life? Maybe your kids can take a bus. Well, what's the bus situation like in your area? Whether, maybe you want more land because you're looking that down the road you're going to build. Well, how many bedrooms do you need? You can't buy a house with one main bedroom if you've got 3 or 4 kids. So all these things are really important, but just go through first of all and create a list of all the things, and then sit down and figure out the important things that you can't live without.
Yeah, there's a good website also. It's called walkscore.com. And it kind of gives you an idea of what's around that area specifically. Like if you're looking at properties, another thing is your real estate agent can pull not only a school list in the area, but we can give you the ratings of those schools, right? So there's also ratings that you can look at. One thing I'll just want to add to that I tell my clients is, you know what, like people don't think of this, but if you're looking at an area before you even, pick a few houses, right? I say drive around. Also, wake up in the morning and use like whatever you use to map out, going to work if you're going to work. So like Waze, for example, right? Or what is it, Google Maps. So look at how long it would take. Let's say, at 7 a.m. when you wake up, where you currently live, how long it takes you to get to work. Then put in the address of where you're thinking about buying. See how long it takes you to go to work in the morning. And then one last piece of advice is go grocery shopping there. Seriously, like drive there, go into the grocery store, see how it feels. What kind of a feeling do you get around, the environment, the people, right? Like see how you feel there, really, because those little things you don't think about when you're when you're like in love, in that stage where you're looking at a property. You can fall in love with a house, but you're forgetting that there's an area that you have to get used to, right? You might love what's in that house or on your property, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to fall in love with the area. Or there might be little things that you didn't think about when you originally made that purchase. And that's kind of what we try to guide our clients, things that you can't really think about because this is not what you do for a living. You don't actually buy and sell properties all the time, so you don't get to figure out or see what those little things are.
Which is why I also say of the property that you're looking at, go there at different times of the day as well. Because you also want to know, if you have small kids, well, you really want to have some kids around the neighborhood. So are there kids around in the neighborhood, or is that area maybe become more for retirees? You don't want to be moving into a neighborhood when you have young kids, when all that's around is retirees, and vice versa. It's learning what's around. So visiting the neighborhood, just like Arie said, or shopping in the neighborhood, but going at different times of the day to see who's around, see, what's going around in that neighborhood. So being really educating yourself on all these different areas. So we're also coming to the end of our hour, and we know that we don't want to stay too long. We need to come around, and next week we'll bring another week and we'll continue to add some more value. But, the whole idea is I want you to start thinking about things in a different way. I want you to start looking at life in different ways. When you're buying, you know what? That's what we said. Speak with an agent and start learning. If you can't afford it the way you think, they might be able to put some different turns on things, of different ways of handling a purchase, or different areas, or of what ways you can do things. Nothing is black and white. It's time to start thinking into color. Arie, do we have any closing thoughts that we can give our
Yeah,
people?
I was actually just going to say something along the same lines that you just mentioned. I mean, when it comes to real estate, I have a lot of experience, but if I go somewhere and I want to buy something else, or if I need a different service, I do realize that a lot of times I don't know everything, in the sense that actually I know nothing, right? So it's good to get a different pair of eyes, and it's good to be open. It's good to be basically a sponge. I mean, even in my own business and in this industry, in real estate, I try to almost every day get information, learn from people, whether it's a new agent or an agent that's been practicing in the business for a long time. Any conversation that I have with anyone, I try to pick something up and kind of pick their brain, because the more information, or I should say, the less information you think the more the more you will actually learn.
It's really it. The whole idea of being open to anything. So, if you have a closed mindset, if you think you know it all, then I'll tell you something, you don't know anything.
I learn a lot from my clients too, Glenda. That's I learn a lot from you as well. That's why we're here.
Well, that's the whole idea. Nobody knows it all. And every day, I get excited that every day I can learn something new. And learning is one of the things that I love most about in life. It's building yourself. So I hope that whoever's been watching today, and if you are watching again after this is posted, maybe you could put onto your hashtag replay so we know who's been watching. And I want you to start asking questions. First of all, to yourself. You know what? What can I do that can make my life a little bit different, better? Well, you know what? We're talking about real estate here, but there's different ways of changing your life for the better. And when we start looking at things, we can start looking at things in different ways. So, you know, today we're talking about real estate. Let's look at even your business. Like we say, Arie has now taken his learnings of where he's gone from starting out as a realtor, going to as a broker, and now he's even adding coaching into this. And who is he coaching? Other brokers, other agents that want to build themselves up, because he's been getting awards for the I don't know, how many years have you been getting awards?
Over 12 years.
So, you know what? He's very humble, and he doesn't blow his own horn, but I'll help him blow it right now. He is doing wonders, even when the times where the market isn't moving. And I know of a lot of people who have actually stepped out of real estate, and it's because he thinks of things in different ways. And that's what I want you to start doing. So maybe if you've been watching this, and possibly if you're a realtor and you want to start changing your life, let's start looking at different things. Start looking at how you can become different in your world that you're living in. If you want to know more, listen, give us a call, hashtag us, Glenda or Arie, and let's start.
As you can see, I love coffee. So if you want to have a coffee and chat, anytime.
And that's what it's all about. So thank you very much today for joining us. Remember to love us, share us, and remember one more important thing. It's time to start thinking in color.